All right, then let us return to Exodus chapter 2, please. Chapter 1. We need to finish chapter 1. And I recognize that what I presented, and what I asked you, and what I tried to draw out in chapter 1 was troubling, and none of you wanted to respond. I don't know if you noticed that. I asked, if you were trying to destroy a newborn baby, what would you do? How would you do it? And nobody responded, because nobody would want to respond to that. As horrible as that is, it's horrid. And none of you said, well, I would do it this way, because who wants to say that? But that's precisely what Pharaoh was trying to do. He told Shiphrah and Puah, if he comes out, if the baby is born and it's a boy, kill him. And I told you something very troubling at the end, which is, at a certain point, 3 years ago, I believe, the governor of New York and the governor of Virginia tried to legalize killing the baby once the baby is out of the womb. So we haven't come very far. Sin is sin. And if you function apart from Christ, you're going to sin. It's the only option. If you function apart from Christ, you're going to sin. But the good news is, if you function in Christ, guess what you won't do? You won't sin. Because when it's Christ living in you and Christ living through you, then what is seen and who is seen is Christ. And he doesn't sin. So you want to go home and you want them to see your walk with the Lord, let them see Christ. And whatever the pressures are back home, and I've already had one of you say to me, I'm a little nervous about going back home because I know what I just came from. I know what I came from just before I came here. And I'm a little uncertain about going back home because I don't want to get back into that. The only hope for not getting back into it ever is to walk in Christ. He is the only one strong enough to resist temptation. Have you noticed you don't have what it takes? Have you noticed that yet? You don't have what it takes to resist the devil? He's way too powerful. I don't have it either. He's way too powerful. But he's not more powerful than the one who indwells me. And so it's to the one who indwells me that I turn. And it's on him I depend, and in him I live. Otherwise, it's going to be a mess. The only way I can take care of my wife is to walk in Christ. I can assure you, if I walked in the flesh, my wife would be wounded. I can assure you of that. So I walk in Christ for her well-being. So it's pretty messy what Pharaoh tried to do. Let's read it again, even though we don't want to. At least I certainly don't. Verse 15. Now what Pharaoh's trying to do is he's trying to get rid of the Jewish boys. He's trying to get rid of the nation of Israel. Now the picture is bigger. The picture isn't about Israel. And the picture isn't about Pharaoh. The picture is about the Messiah. Think big, brethren. He's already tried to reduce Israel by making them work hard. That didn't work. They kept growing and growing and growing. So verse 15, I want to talk this through a little bit more. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other was named Puah. And he said, when you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth, and see them upon the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them, but let the boys live. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and let the boys live? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous, and they give birth before the midwife can get to them. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty. And it came about because the midwives feared God that he established households for them. Stop there. Okay, so we have two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, right? Okay, how many young women like you are there at that time? Approximately. 600,000? 600,000 young women like you? Those would be very busy midwives if they were the only midwives. More than likely, they're the head of the midwives. Midwifery, I guess. They're more than likely the head of the midwives. So what that means is they communicated to the midwives to not kill the baby boys. What do you think about this event? Think big. What do you think about this event?
It's pretty messed up.
It's what?
It's pretty messed up.
You want to expound on that?
I don't know, it's just hard to realize like how Pharaoh slept at night, I guess. I don't really know if he thought about what he was asking him to do, or just like a tactical response rather than using his humanity.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about what the midwives did?
Very courageous.
Very courageous. They actually didn't obey the king. They didn't obey Pharaoh. And how did God respond to the fact that they didn't obey Pharaoh?
He blessed them.
He blessed them. Do you think the midwives were thinking big? Do you think the midwives? I don't know. Maybe they were thinking, we have to keep Israel around because the Messiah is coming through us. It's possible.
But they feared God, it says. So they were afraid of God more than Pharaoh.
Yeah, they served God more than Pharaoh. Mm-hmm.
Regardless, they knew what he asked them to do was wrong.
Yeah. And Pharaoh was definitely causing a conflict in their lives, wasn't he? And they chose to obey God. Yeah. In order to obey God, they had to disobey the king. Tough choice. But the king forced it upon them. Okay, any other thoughts about this event?
Curious what it means by he provided households for them.
Mm-hmm. You're curious about what it means? What do you think it means?
I guess maybe they provided a man for them? They provided for them? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the Hebrew word is families. So it might be even implied that they were not married, they didn't have children. At least Shiphrah and Puah as the head. I assume they were the head of the midwives. I don't know that, but there were a lot of young Jewish women giving birth. So it's just a logical conclusion. And perhaps Shiphrah and Puah did not have families. And so God gave them families.
Really odd occupation for someone who's never given birth. Seems like that's where they would have gotten their experience back then.
It would have been,
Birth would have been like having experience to help others with their birth. So if they didn't ever do that, it'd be an odd occupation back then to be in.
yeah, possibly. Possibly, yeah. It doesn't say. Maybe they could have been barren. We don't know. They could have tried.
They also weren't killed. That's quite amazing.
They weren't killed. Yeah, that's true. It's a good observation. Okay, other thoughts about this event?
Yeah, I was curious, because they obviously lied to Pharaoh, right?
Uh-huh.
And so is this a case of one sin is better than another? Because, right, lying is a sin, right? So I don't know how that works out, like, I guess.
Yeah, I don't actually know that it says they lied to Pharaoh. It says they didn't do what Pharaoh said.
But when Pharaoh asked them, they said they're vigorous and give birth before the midwives come to them.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's probably a lie, but it doesn't say it's a lie. It just says they disobeyed the king. which is also a problem as well. So let's just discuss. For me, I'd prefer to discuss it from that position because that's what's stated. They did not do what Pharaoh said. Could be a lie, but I'm not sure of that. But I am certain they didn't do what Pharaoh said because that's what it says. Okay, so let's talk about it. You guys talk about it. They didn't do what Pharaoh says. Is that a sin?
No, I think because God says obey your government unless it goes against God, and God says do not kill. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pharaoh was clearly had stepped out from under the, shall we say, authority of God by issuing this type of edict. So he's supposed to function under the authority of God. God put him in that position. There are examples of other kings like Nebuchadnezzar or Sennacherib, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, other kings that God had put in positions of authority who stepped out from underneath God's authority, and God struck them and took away their position as king. In other words, leaders need to recognize who put them in that position. Yeah. And so when the king steps out from underneath the authority of God, that might open the door for us to not obey the king, especially if the king asks us to sin so blatantly, like murdering baby boys. He created a crisis, and you have no choice but to make a decision. He created a crisis for them. They have to make a decision. And what he said was, when a baby comes out, you have to be the one to kill it. That's a major crisis to create for somebody. And they had to make a choice. But then think big. And we've already discussed what the big is. So if we think big, what about it?
If they didn't lie, the Messiah would come. If they did what Pharaoh asked, the Messiah would come.
They very well could have been a tool to stop the messianic plan. Because that's precisely what Pharaoh was trying to be, a tool to stop the Messiah. So if you think big, it kind of tempers down the fact that they didn't do what the king said. Other thoughts?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So, this is during a time period where the Jewish people have the Abrahamic covenant, but they don't have the law yet, right? So, is there maybe a possibility of, like, obviously God's character is the same throughout the entire Bible, but is there a possibility that there's the way the gospel is carried out is different before the law comes? So like they knew that God disapproved of some things, right? Obviously, murder not okay. But they didn't have the law saying you shall not lie.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that plays into why He blessed them? Because it feels weird for God to bless them after they've disobeyed and maybe lied. So do you think that since they didn't have the law yet, they had some sort of, I guess, ignorance?
I don't know about ignorance. They definitely did not have a black and white commandment to not lie or to not disobey the king. So I think that's a fair consideration, Lucas. But and to me, and I understand what you're saying, but to me, you say it feels weird that he would bless them after that. But boy, we have to put it in its perspective of the context of what's going on. And we have to think bigger than the midwives and Pharaoh. We have to think messianic plan. Because if we don't, then we can get a little bit focused on secondary or even tertiary, third level issues. We have to stay focused on the primary issue. God was going to protect his messianic plan. He was going to make sure the Messiah came. Because he's the only one who signed the covenant. I don't know if you were here this morning for that. But he signed the covenant. On my word, I'm going to bring the Messiah. And Pharaoh was trying to stop it. Ultimately, I believe Satan was trying to stop it. So I understand what you're saying. It doesn't trouble me much because for me anyway, I want to come back and look at it from a big picture. And there is so much evil going on around that that I want to look from a big picture perspective and let the smaller events just kind of pull back from them and not get too focused on that and see what God's trying to do in the big picture. It helps me understand that one anyway. And I think there are others. You know, God does some things himself. He takes people's lives just like that. Ananias and Sapphira lied, and God took their lives. Do you know anybody who's ever lied to a pastor or to a youth group leader? Who's ever disobeyed or done something naughty, something sinful in youth group? God didn't did God just snap them out? No. But he did Ananias and Sapphira because the picture was bigger. And he was prepared to do that to them. Yeah.
So you said you thought it was weird that God blessed them after that. Part of me thinks that because they didn't obey, because they didn't take essentially the women's blessing, because children are a blessing, they didn't take the blessing away, they left them. Like, those who will bless you will be blessed. Do you think that's
Wow.
it?
That's pretty insightful.
Yeah.
You guys hear that?
So children are a blessing, right? The midwives were supposed to take that blessing away. But those who bless you will be blessed. So the women left the children and gave the blessing, and so God blessed them because they were blessing the women.
That's the big picture.
Is it okay if I say that another time in the future?
Go for it, go for it.
Wow. That is so insightful. Thank you. Anybody else? Anything?
Did you ever check or did you I know it's like super short period of time, but you checked for the king of Egypt and the Pharaoh?
I did not.
Okay.
No.
And I was wrong earlier. It switches in 19. So right after Pharaoh was like, why didn't you kill the babies? Then right in their response, they said, under Pharaoh. So they switched and they started talking to Pharaoh.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so ask me again, Nick. It won't take me long. Things changed after class, and
Yeah.
I kind of lost that focus. That was just something Nick asked me to do. Okay, anything else?
I was thinking about, I think was it David who like pretended to be insane so that he wouldn't get killed?
Uh-huh.
I was wondering if, I don't know, I just was thinking how that was kind of similar to the situation with midwives, how they kind of made it seem a certain way so that they wouldn't get killed, so that, because, I mean, obviously if they made it clear that they were not killing babies, they probably would have gotten killed, and then someone else would have had to kill the babies, and the babies would have gotten killed anyway. So like by protecting, by like pretending that the situation was a different way, they kind of, in the long run, saved their own lives to save other people's lives. And I feel like that's kind of similar to what David was doing. I was just wondering if there was like any connection.
Hmm.
I don't know. I was just thinking about how it's similar.
I think it's a good perspective, a good observation, similar with David having deceived the king of the Philistine king. And then, now, to take it a step farther, can anybody think, now this is kind of asking you to really click in and engage here. Can anybody think how David doing that could have been part of the big plan, the big picture?
Jesus was supposed to come from his family line, right?
Yeah. He was going to come from, remember, Jesus, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David. He was going to come from Judah, and being one of the sons of Jacob, Judah's family line is traced through David, the king. So if David had gotten wiped out, then, again, think big picture, we could lose the Messiah.
messianic needs like relating to the Messiah, right?
Yes.
So like his messianic plan is more important than the law because the messianic plan was basically gonna cover whatever detail from the law, the Messiah was going to cover that. So even if you had to break the laws to get to the Messiah, it was more important. What I'm kind of gathering.
I don't know if I would make that into a theological doctrine,
Oh, yeah,
but there apparently are times.
yeah.
Yeah. And I like Lucas' observation that it's pre-Moses, pre-Mosaic law, pre-613 commandments. I think that's a valid observation as well. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I was just a little curious, like, not past tense, but like in the present time, do you think there is certain situations where it's not a sin to lie, or is that unclear?
I don't know if it's not a sin to lie, per se.
Yeah.
I don't have the authority to decide that.
Oh, for sure,
But, Rick, do you know how Rick learned about his Bible school in England? Does anybody know? Do you know how Rick originally got to, not how he learned about his Bible school, but how he first got to England? He got there by a woman named Corrie ten Boom. Anybody ever hear of Corrie ten Boom? A woman.
Yeah.
He heard a woman speak, and he connected to what she said, and then he went to her because she knew people in England, and he wanted to go to England. And so he went to her and talked to her about it, and she eventually helped connect him to some people in England. Her name was Corrie ten Boom.
He actually met her.
I'm sorry?
He actually met her.
He did. So does anybody here know? Obviously, Alexis knows who Corrie ten Boom is or was. Does anybody else here know who Corrie ten Boom was?
Hiding place. Whoa, that thing.
what was that?
The hiding place.
Corrie ten Boom's father. Do you want to explain it since you know Nick?
I could be totally off here, but I'm just swinging for the fences here. Corrie ten Boom, she's like a Holocaust survivor.
She is.
Yeah, and then she wrote a whole bunch of books about it, but, the hiding place thing got super famous, and was like an inspirational speaker slash writer.
Yeah, that's correct. Now, why did she name her book The Hiding Place? Does anybody know?
Hiding Jews in her attic.
She was hiding Jews. Now, was that against the edict of the king?
Oh, yeah.
There were a lot of people actually who did that during World War II. They hid Jews. Or not even Jews. They might have hid somebody with Down syndrome. Does anybody know anyone with Down syndrome?
Christians as well.
Yes. So let's think about hiding someone with Down syndrome. Right? They're like the most precious people around. Right? If you know somebody with Down syndrome. You just want to be around them. Because any Down syndrome person I've encountered seems to like me. And not every person I've encountered likes me, but all the Down syndrome people seem to like me. Such wonderful people. Would you want them to be in the hands of the Nazis? No. So they would hide people who have Down syndrome. Okay, that's against the edict of the king. Was it wrong to disobey Hitler? The king was forcing them to make a choice. Forcing a choice. And when a king forces an evil choice, he has stepped out from underneath the authority of God. And you need to think carefully. But I think it becomes a bigger picture again. Instead of honing in on whether I can hide him or not, T-Ray, I'll mention one of the Down syndrome people I know, T-Ray, whether it's okay to hide T-Ray or to just say, do whatever you want to T-Ray, that's a very difficult choice for a person to make. I would endorse hiding T-Ray, just so you know. I would endorse hiding T-Ray. That's about the best I can do. Anything else? All right, well, plan A didn't work. What was plan A?
Work hard.
Work hard. I don't know how he thought that was going to succeed, but that was his plan. And if we read through plan A again, we'll see twice, maybe 3 times, it says they still kept growing. Okay, so what was plan B? Kill all the boys. And if you kill all the boys, you get rid of Israel in 1 generation. But plan B didn't work. Plan C. Pardon?
Thank the Lord.
Thank the Lord is right. But he didn't give up. Plan C. He had a 3rd plan. Only 1 verse is mentioned about it, but then it's built out. Verse 22, chapter 1. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive. Every son who is born. Now, let me read it again. Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive. Same scenario. 1 generation, you're going to get rid of Israel. This is demonic. This is diabolical. You know, diabolic, diabolos, in Spanish means devil, right? This is a diabolical plan. He's definitely trying to stop the coming of the Messiah. He's under the control of the devil. Nothing new compared to the previous event. How on earth does he think this is going to work? Let's think about this. It says he commanded all his people. And that's what it says in the Hebrew. So what does that mean? Does that mean he commanded all of the Jews that, because it's not the Egyptian babies, it's just the Jewish ones. He commanded the Jews, okay, mama, you have a baby boy, throw him in the Nile.
I don't think so. Because Pharaoh is Egyptian.
Okay?
He commanded all his people.
Okay, so let's think through that scenario.
Wouldn't it be all the Egyptians?
Well, yeah, the Israelites were his people as well. They were subservient to him. But let's go to your scenario first. Okay? He commanded all the Egyptians. All right? Let's think that one through. Okay, woman and husband. I'm a father. I have a wife. She's birthed 4 children for me. Somebody rushes in to take my son. What am I going to do? I'm certainly not going to... have you ever heard the expression, over my dead body? That's what it would be. You're not getting my son except over my dead body. You have to kill me if you want to get my son. And I imagine Patty would say the same thing. Okay, so you've gotten through my husband, now you're going to have to go through me to get my son. Right, dear?
She doesn't know about that.
No, she does know about that. Yeah. Nobody's getting my son to kill him. So it seems to me that if you're going to rush into my house to take my son, we're going to have a wild event. Right? So if all of the Egyptians are rushing into all of these Jewish homes to take all of these Jewish boys, Egypt is going to be exploding with craziness. How could he expect it to work? But don't give him credit for being logical, because he's under the control of the devil. And the devil is out of his mind.
Even his own daughter doesn't think that's logical.
Yeah, that's right, which we're coming to next. So let's go with the first scenario, the other scenario, that it's the Jewish people. So the mamas need to take their baby boys or the papas and throw them into the river. Are they going to do that? No. They're not going to do that. So how he would have expected this to work, I don't know. Anyway, it didn't. It didn't work. Yeah. How old is he?
Yeah.
This particular Pharaoh at the time? I'm just trying to think through. I don't know.
If he was younger, that might explain like how naive he is.
Well, he has kids, so he's not too young.
I mean, you don't have to be that old to have kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how old he was. That's a fair question. Okay? Anything else? Aiden, I want you to know that at the beginning of class, I spoke to the students about what's happened today, and in particular, I told them how much I appreciate what you said during our gathering.
I have a request.
Yes,
At the end of class, can we pray for Aiden?
of course, we certainly can. Class is supposed to, is that okay with you? Okay. Thanks for asking. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's go to chapter 2. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket, covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile with her maidens walking alongside the Nile. And she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid, and she brought it to her. Okay? Let's stop there. Anybody have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, the faith of that woman who, like, it was like a way of not obeying and yet hiding her son and hoping that somebody would do what she does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she didn't obey, and there are no Egyptians who rushed in. Her name is Jochebed. We find that in chapter 6 of Exodus. The father's name is Amram. We also find that in chapter 6. Okay, so she hid him for 3 months. And when she could hide him no longer, what's the 3 months deal? Nursing. Anything else? Well, 3 months, yes, nursing, but she probably nursed him longer than that. In fact, she probably nursed him 3 to 5 years.
But she didn't know she would get to do that.
That's true, but she couldn't hide him any longer because babies just start making more noise at around 3 months. They're just noisier. So she could hide him no longer. So she put him in a wicker basket and covered it over with tar and pitch. Have there been any other vessels in the Bible like that? Noah's Ark. Same deal, covered over with tar and pitch. She made a little ark for her son and put him in there. Okay? And so his sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. Verse 4. Who's the sister? Miriam is the sister. And what did his sister do?
She watched to see what would happen. She followed him.
Yes, she stood at a distance. We'll come to what she did in the next portion. But let's discuss this in verse 2, okay? Because this is significant to understand this boy. The woman conceived, bore a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. She saw that he was beautiful. You know, I don't know any women that when she gives birth to a child, she picks him up and she goes, oh. Doesn't every woman think her baby is beautiful? What's the deal here?
I thought other kids, like, sometimes when they're newborns.
I mean, yeah, we've had people talk about our children that they weren't so beautiful. It's not technically beautiful. It actually says beautiful to God. If you turn to Acts chapter 7, you'll get more information. So turn to Acts 7, please. Acts chapter 7. This is the guy we were talking about earlier. Okay, Acts chapter 7. Okay, this is Stephen, not the pickleball player. This is Stephen, the deacon who's about to be stoned to death. Acts chapter 7, verse 17. Now look at what he says. But as the time of the promise was approaching, now this isn't fair to just jump in, but let's see if we can perceive what he's saying. But as the time of the promise was approaching, which God had assured to Abraham, the people increased and multiplied in Egypt. Now just stop there for a moment. What is Stephen saying? I know we're just jumping in the middle of it, but what is Stephen saying here? As the time of the promise was approaching, which God had assured to Abraham.
Freedom.
Okay?
Promised land?
The promised land?
His people leaving Egypt.
His people leaving Egypt. When did God promise that to Abraham?
400 years prior?
When he had no kids.
He had no children? Where in the Bible might we find that? We read it this morning. Genesis, not 12, 15. Genesis 15. Remember? When Abraham had the animals burning on either side, and then God went through, just before God went through in the smoking furnace and the flaming torch, just before he went through, he said, know for certain that your descendants are going to be strangers in a foreign land, and after 400 years, I'm going to bring them out. Okay, so now, as the time of the promise was approaching, which God had assured to Abraham, verse 17, the people increased and multiplied in Egypt. You see how many times this great nation is mentioned? That they increased and multiplied? Until there arose another king, verse 18, over Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph. It was he, this king, who took shrewd advantage of our race and mistreated our fathers so that they would expose their infants and they would not survive. And it was at this time that Moses was born, and he was lovely in the sight of God, and he was nurtured 3 months in his father's home. Stop there. When Jochebed gets her baby boy, she looks at him and she says, he's not just lovely, he's lovely to God. He's lovely to God. Well-pleasing to God. Now he's a newborn. What does that mean? Well-pleasing to God. Did he come out sinless? Did he come out spiritually alive? Did he?
No.
So what does it mean?
He was supposed to be born.
He was?
To live.
No, there's something more to it. And we'll see what that more is as we go further on here. When he is born, Jochebed knows something about this boy relating to God. In other words, Jochebed knows this boy is set apart to God for something. Jochebed knows there's something different about God, about this boy. We're going to see that play itself out. But we're supposed to stop now because it's 5 o'clock. You said to me yesterday, cliffhanger. I don't plan to do that, but I don't want to transcend our time. So we'll stop. But when we come back tomorrow morning, we're going to focus in on what is happening with this boy.